Welcome to In the Ven Zone with Christine McKay, where we get candid about what it takes to negotiate effectively. You'll learn from the challenges and successes of entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. We help you change the nature of your negotiations and get more from every deal you do.
Hey everybody, welcome back to In the Ven Zone. We are so excited that you are choosing to spend some time with us today, and very excited to have our guest today, Matthew Marini. He is a prince amongst princes when it comes to negotiating in David and Goliath situations. He is the president of Agile, and that means that Matthew gets to help people who become excellent technical recruiters and account managers. And he has learned through his experience that if you treat people you are working with the way that you would like to be treated, success will follow. Matthew helps hire and train and develop business professionals into leaders in the technical staffing industry, which is a really fascinating industry because a lot of people don't know this. And Matthew, I think we'll talk some about this, but a lot of technical people within the tech industry are contract employees, or they come through staffing through organizations like yours. It is a very different kind of a staffing model than many other industries. Matthew has been growing and leading teams in the IT consulting and staffing industry for over 8 years, and he's been in industry helping find people new jobs for over 13 years. He is devoted to his family, and when the opportunity presents itself, he loves to golf and he enjoys outdoor activities. His volunteer time is focused on kids, not his own, he says, and he works as a mentor for Year Up, and his wife and he have been foster parents for children in the community, his community, for the past 3 years. Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that. I have a number of people in my network who were foster kids, and it's actually something that I recently, it keeps coming up for me, and meeting people involved in the foster system, either as children or people working in the system. And so I think I need to heed that calling a little bit and get involved in that, because it just keeps coming up in the last 3 or 4 months for me. Like I can't, probably a dozen people when I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah.
So Matthew, welcome. Thank you for being here. I really
good morning.
appreciate
Thank you for having me. Definitely looking forward to speaking with you. And when I found out about you and your business, I was really excited to learn more. And I love your, your mantra of David versus Goliath, because I feel that way every day. But thank you for the nice introduction.
Oh, it's so good to have you here. So tell us, let's start by just telling us a bit about more about what it is you do and how you got to this point. What brought you here?
Great. So what we do is, in the IT world, it is incredibly difficult to find good IT engineers, developers, web developers, application developers, guys that work on the cloud. It's incredibly hard to find these guys. And so large organizations, very large ones, most of our clients are Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 companies. They need help finding the best of the best IT talent. And so they are willing to pay us to go out and find them and either bring them to the table so that the company can hire them directly, or use them as a contractor, in which case we facilitate the ability for them to be on our payroll and have benefits and work as a contractor. So that's what we do. How I got into the business was, since I was a kid, I always wanted to be in sales. You could have asked 6-year-old me, what do you want to do? And I would have said, I want to be a sales. My dad was a sales manager and moved up in business management. And so that was just what I had my heart desired on. So I went to school for business, knowing that I wanted to be in sales. And come to find out, there's organizations now in colleges that have sales programs, which is amazing. University of Georgia has one now, and so does KSU, which I think is unbelievable. I hope they're teaching negotiation. I'm not sure if they are. I hope they are. But they have sales designations now for a major, which is unbelievable. I wish I would have had that. But anyways, and in 2006, I came out of school and started selling mortgages. Became a loan officer at a company, and I helped crash the economy and ruin the mortgage market. And by 2008, selling subprime loans and no doc loans to people who shouldn't have been buying houses. So I did that for a year and I loved it. It was a real difficult sales process. You get your leads off of bank rate. You're the 15th loan officer, mortgage broker to call that person off of that lead, and they would cuss you out and all that. But I loved it. It was, the thrill of the chase, helping people get into homes, helping people buy, their first home or refinance or whatever. And it was really good, but did see that before we had the crash in 2008, did see kind of the writing on the wall as loans were getting declined for good borrowers. And so I looked around for a new job and found technical recruiting / account management, and read what that's about. The job description said, relationship-based selling, it's IT consulting, and all these terms that sounded interesting to 24-year-old me. And so got into the business with a large organization, and over the last 13 years, I've just worked my way up from recruiter to a recruiting manager and team lead and director of recruiting, and then 3 years ago at Agile, after being the director here for a while, our former president moved on, and they named me the new president here. So been at Agile now for going on 6 years. And as you mentioned in my bio, which was a great summary, very, very nice job.
Well, thank you for providing it to me.
Yeah, good summary. You can find it on my LinkedIn page. What I really am focused on is equipping my team to be good business people. And that's why I'm interested in this topic, as negotiation is a huge part of what we do.
Sure.
And so we have a team of recruiters, which our recruiters are more like salespeople. We're normally calling someone who didn't know that they were looking for a job today. And our recruiters call them and like, hey, I know of a company that would really like to talk with you. Would you like to discuss a possible new opportunity? And so they sell opportunities. And then our salespeople are going out to large organizations. Generally, our best customers are larger companies, and they may be larger, like, a $200 million company, which doesn't rank them on any list of size, but they're still a very large company. So they're looking for new customers. They're servicing our current customers, and then we have a small operations team, and then I have a team in Florida. We're in the Florida market too. So. My job is working with them and helping each team, train new people and just make them the best recruiters or account managers possible.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And so tell me a little bit about when you are because as the listeners know, and as you know, because you've listened to a lot of the stuff that I've done, that's the whole concept of David and Goliath negotiation is a big deal for me. And, I have worked for and negotiated with almost half of the Fortune 500, both on the procurement side as well as on the sales side. And so I've always found, and part of why I'm just passionate about it, is that big companies often appear to be taking advantage of small businesses. And not long ago, I had Scott O'Neill on the show, and Scott is the CEO of Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment, which owns the New Jersey Devils and the Philadelphia 76ers. And they realized that they kind of started looking through their supplier base, and they realized they had very few Black-owned businesses. And what they realized in doing kind of an analysis is that they actually are structured in a way, as are most big companies, that you have to hit certain delivery requirements, certain pricing requirements, certain payment requirements. Like there's just these metrics that they think of as standard. But when you think of those particular metrics as standard, what it does is it essentially carves out your ability to work with smaller organizations, because smaller organizations can't meet some of those obligations because we just don't have the size and the scale. And so that means prices are higher. And so they've actually implemented a new program called Buy Black, which is geared around helping them to figure out, and they've partnered with the Black community in Philadelphia to figure out how to do that, to kind of create a more level playing field. But in technical staffing, where most of the companies, I would say, are smaller, right? You do have some big players, but those tend to rise to more on the executive side versus kind of more mid-level and the doers in the tech industry. So tell me about one, how do you, as a small organization, tell the audience a little bit more about how the industry is structured, because I think it matters in this case, because so many of you are small businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're exactly right. There are some large organizations, some, if they were traded in the United States, they would be, some of the largest companies. But Randstad's German owned, and there's some large ones that are Japanese owned and stuff. But there's a few big players. But the truth of the matter is, in any market for IT staffing, the very biggest companies in our space don't even capture 1 or 2% of the market share. They don't even have that much. It's that fragmented. And so the majority of the staffing vendors, so staffing companies that are servicing large enterprise level businesses and then also large companies, it's extremely competitive. I'm in Atlanta. I've heard that in Atlanta, and I hear different statistics, it kind of moves around, but there's at least 300 IT focused staffing companies in Atlanta alone. Wow. And the biggest players only have a percent or two of the market share, with the huge companies here based in Atlanta, the Deltas, the Home Depots, the ADPs, the UPSs, Coca-Colas, those kind of companies. The really big companies that everybody knows, like the Ronstads and the Robert Halfs and companies like that are national and sometimes global, very, very small market share. So that means that there's lots of us. If there's 300 IT focused staffing companies in Atlanta, probably 250 of us would be considered a small or very medium-sized business, probably somewhere between $1 million in revenue size business, to most of us that are players on the bigger scale are going to be somewhere between 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million in revenue.
That's definitely a small business. That's absolutely small business.
Yeah. So it's us at a, size of a, let's say $20 million business going up against the majority of our customers, of my customers, are companies like Panasonic,
multi-billion-dollar Goliaths,
yeah, Home Depot, Adobe, customers like this, that US Bank. These are some of my largest, and all of them are measured in billions. And so yes, they have teams. They have a procurement team. They have a law team. They hire people just like you. You were one of them, that are professional negotiators, and these are the people that we work with to sign. Usually what we're looking to sign is an overarching agreement called an MSA, a master service agreement, that allows us to be a vendor for that company. And so they will send us their MSA that their lawyers have written and their professional negotiators have looked over. And they will send that to us and say, here are our terms. If you'd like to be one of our vendors, sign this. Oh, by the way, we don't make any changes to this agreement. All of our vendors have agreed to this. And this is something I definitely would want to mention for the audience, because the truth of the matter is that's never true.
That is correct.
They say it every time because nobody likes to negotiate it. But somebody in procurement, or in our case, sometimes it's HR, talent acquisition, they say, here's the agreement. We don't make any changes. And so what they're hoping for is that the majority of the salespeople on my team are mid-20s to early 30s. They've been in business a few years. They're really good at what they do. But in their course of their career, they may have negotiated with these large organizations a handful of times, 5, 10. And they're hoping that, I guess, by sending us that contract and saying, oh, we don't negotiate, that we'll just say, oh, okay, we'll sign it.
Well, let's pause on that for a second, because that is absolutely what they're hoping for. And, I've now worked with hundreds and hundreds of small businesses, and I come into the situation, and a lot of times people have just signed those contracts. I have a friend and a client who works in a machine shop. It's a family-owned business. He's second generation, and they make parts for the aerospace defense industry. So also lots of behemoth, Raytheon, Lockheed, Boeing, NASA, et cetera. And one of the behemoth companies sent him a contract recently, and it said, okay, we want to buy X amount of product, right? So let's just say it was 1,000 units, right? And he has 12 employees, by the way. So he's about 10 to 15 million, let's call it. So we want to buy 1,000 units. We're only going to commit to buying 5% of those. But you have to be prepared to expedite 50% of them at no additional cost if we decide to do that.
Wow.
I'm like, on what planet would you do that? I said, first of all, I said, what are you going to do? Are you going to store raw materials? And then are you going to keep staff on call? Because if you're going to produce that many units, that requires a jump in your staff, right? Are you going to build it and hope they buy it and then hold finished goods? Do you have the distribution contract? Do you have a delivery contract, shipping contracts to be able to deal with expedited? I mean, the amount of things that he would have had to do operationally to support that kind of deal was insane. And I said to him, I said, there's no way. We talked about it. And it was like, there's no way. So literally he sent an email back to them saying, there's no way. And they immediately backed off on most of that.
Oh, really?
Right?
That's great.
Because they were throwing out to see if he'd accept it, because I guarantee that a number of his competitors or companies similar to him have in fact accepted those kind of terms. So they do it because they've gotten away with it before, and somebody has naively signed that contract. And so that's why they say it, it's like, and so, yeah, it's very frustrating. This is one of the reasons why I get really passionate about what I do, because that stuff really ticks me off. And it's like, it's so frustrating, and it's in nobody's best interest to play that game. And that is what that is. That is a game.
I completely agree. It's like what you just said with Scott, like this big company that put these terms on your friend there. They thought that was best. Maybe people have signed that before, but it does eliminate a lot of times the little guys, right? Because if they weren't flexible on those terms, he would have said, sorry, we can't take that business. And as you mentioned with the 76ers and New Jersey Devils, they had these terms in place that eliminated the small minority-owned businesses or other small businesses that just couldn't compete on those terms. And you know what? The sad part is that might have been the best vendor for them. And this is what we try to explain to our customers. It's like, hey, if you throw these terrible terms out, all you're going to get are the other 200 staffing firms that aren't very good. They're the only ones who are going to sign this junk. And then you're going to be left with a vendors list that's really not servicing you the way you need to be serviced. In fact, there's a reason you called me, and we're talking about us becoming a vendor for you. And it's because you pushed these terrible terms down your other vendors' throats. They begrudgingly accepted them, and then they're not really servicing you the way that you need to be serviced. And so nobody won. Like this the outcome was terrible for everybody. You didn't get the help you needed because your terms were bad, and the only companies that were signing it were not the best companies. And so now you don't have good vendors. And so who won?
Well, you were telling me, so when we had an initial conversation before we set up the recording, and you were telling me this great story about a company that you were talking to was really driving hard to cut price. And that's one I want to make sure that you share that story, because I thought it was super important. One of the things that I talk about is that price should more often be an outcome of a negotiation or an output of a negotiation, not the input. And a lot of salespeople start with price when they're in a negotiation. And the challenge for that is that especially if you have a formal contract in place, there are many elements in a formal contract that drive cost. And if price gets determined before those elements are negotiated, then you're often taking on cost that you have not offset in your price. So if a salesperson goes in and leads with price, then, or says, we got to have this deal. So they drive price down and they accept, they agree to crazy discounts. Then all these additional costs that are in a lot of these Goliath contracts, everything from how you print an invoice. In some cases, these big companies will have a clause in their contract that says, by the way, if you're going to send me an invoice, it must look exactly like this, right? And so, that's if you're a small business. Do you have that set up? And there's a cost of setting that up? I mean, it might not be high, but have you accounted for that? Tell me about the story about how this one company just was hammering on price, and it's like, you're not going to get your best people if you do that.
Right. So and this just happened recently, but a great win for our team. I'm really happy with the outcome. So we had a client, we were actually renegotiating. We probably want to talk about renegotiating later, because I'm a big believer in renegotiating.
Oh yeah. Oh, I am too. So we'll definitely come to that. That's one of my favorite topics.
But it's a company we had worked with years ago, and there was new leadership in that company, and they wanted to re-engage with us. They needed some help hiring software engineers. And so we renegotiated our terms, and fairly standard in the, just for background information, fairly standard in the recruiting business. If you hire somebody, let's say for $100,000 salary, at 20% of their first year salary fee is generally what a staffing company receives. So a $20,000 fee is what you would expect on a $100,000 person salary. And most IT people that we get hired are usually in the low 100s, 100 to maybe $150,000 salary is pretty typical for your, staff level engineer or developer, cloud operations guy, whatever it is. So this company said, okay, we're going to sign a new agreement and we'll agree to the 20%. We were able to convince them that this is industry standard. If you want good service from any staffing company that you pick in Atlanta, this is what everybody does. In fact, for these types of roles, we've been asking for 25% because they're in such high demand. Basically, we can name the price, but we were willing to go to 20%, so we agreed on that. They said that they're under budget constraints right now. Obviously, with COVID and things going on, budgets are tight. We completely understand that. So they wanted to go, oh, would you do 15%? Would you do 18%? And they were really hammering us. And the danger for us is if we agree in our agreement, in our MSA that lasts for sometimes indefinitely, but usually a couple of years, if we agree to a lower percentage, that doesn't just hurt us on this deal, it hurts us on all future business, which if I sign that contract at 15%, now they're one of my only customers at 15%, and my recruiters don't want to work on that business. They'd rather work on business that's 20% or 25%. They're not interested in actually servicing that client the way that client needed to be serviced. And so we help educate them on like, hey, this is to level the playing field. 20% is normal. But they're like, man, we have these two hires. We need to make them. We're very deadline to make them, and we're under budget right now, just closing out this year. How can you help us? Can you do 15%? And we're like, okay, let's do this. Long term, we both agree that the partnership is important, and that 20% to us means that you value us as suppliers to you. And of course, we value your business. So let's go ahead and sign the agreement at the agreed upon 20% so that the longevity of our relationship makes sense for both parties and we'll both be happy. Mm-hmm. On this one, on these two hires that you need to make right now, we can agree and write a separate agreement, like a statement of work, that we're going to do them at a lesser rate. And what my salesperson wanted to do was meet in the middle, right? We're saying 20%, they're saying 15. Let's go at 17 and a half, or some number that we agree to. They're going to say 15, we're going to say 19, they'll say 16, we'll say 18, they'll say 17. We'll just meet in the middle, right? And I don't like that.
I hate that. Yeah,
I hate splitting the difference. I don't like it. And so we brainstormed with the salesperson on my team to try to come up with something different. And what we decided is, let's shift the paradigm. Okay, let's not argue over 1% or 2%, right? Because that can just go back and forth, and both parties are going to leave very angry. Like you both feel like you lost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, let's just do the math ahead of time. Figure out if we hire this person at 120 or 130,000, 20% fee, we're going to get 21, 22, 23,000, someone in there. If they're under budget, why don't we just ask them questions, find out what they have to spend, and throw out a number that we feel is fair and we're happy to do, and that fits inside their budget, and let's take the percentage off the table. Because here's what's going to happen. If we go with a percentage, let's say we land on 17, well, they'll make these two hires at 17%. They may be happy. We're not that happy, but it's good enough. What's going to happen though is on the third hire, the next one, they're going to have to go up to 20%, and they're going to feel like they're stretching to go up. And I feel like they're probably going to use, put a carrot out there of like, hey, we'll give you the third hire, but can you still do it at 17%? Mm-hmm. So I said, let's take the percentage off the table and let's go for flat fee. And let's propose a number of 21,000. And let's use that as, hey, can we both agree on this? This is a flat fee. If you're looking at budgeting and planning ahead, I know as a manager, I love
Sure.
to know what I'm going to spend in the future. It really helps me budget. It's like, let's just take percentage off the table, go flat fee. And that way, when we go back to 20%, they won't have this feeling of like, we're going up. It's just, it completely eliminated it, right?
Yeah.
So no longer focused on the percentage. It's now on a flat fee. And by the way, we asked for an intangible, a non monetary thing. We're like, we will take an agreed upon flat fee, and we would like exclusivity on this deal so that we don't have competition. Can you agree to that? And we got it. So we got two things. We got a fee that is anything above $20,000 for us on a fee is a good fee. My recruiters are very happy to work on that job for that. And we got it as exclusive business, which is even better because now it's a guaranteed money for us.
Right.
And so we found something that we could both agree on, and then we got something extra. And for me, that's a huge win.
So I love that. So I call that changing the nature of the discussion, right? Changing the nature of the negotiation. So when we're talking about money, right? When we're talking about price, people get fixated on either the dollar number or a percentage. And generally, in my experience, somebody's focusing on one of those pieces. And it's like, then that's how they talk. So I was in a renegotiation and with a client that owed a lot of money and to a vendor, and they couldn't afford to pay it. And this was many years ago. It was actually during the dot-com bubble bursting. And I came in and it was like they owed over $1 million to this vendor. They couldn't pay it. They were going to go out of business. It was an internet services provider, my client was, and they owed the money to their hosting company. So they're going to get kicked out of their cage, and they were just going to have to get shut down. Everybody was fixated on the dollar amount. So the opposite of you, everyone was fixated on the dollars, right? And all I did was stop talking dollars and start talking percentage. And when we start talking percentage, we reduce that liability by 73%.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Right? Just by changing that one thing. I'm always looking for creative ways to teach, and we're getting ready to launch our new Venn Masters program. And one of the things that, and everybody listening right now gets to listen to this little vignette of the training, but I found a clip from Sesame Street, and it's there's a fly in my soup. And the waiter comes over and the patron is like, there's a fly in my soup. So the waiter picks up the bowl and looks under the bowl. And he's like, I don't see a fly in your soup. It's not under my soup. It's in my soup. Right. And they go through this whole thing and then the waiter looks around the bowl. It's not around the bowl. It's not around the soup. It's in my soup. That one word, a single word change from dollar to percentage or percentage to dollar or whatever the topic is, can make a difference. So when you're negotiating, so to all the listeners, when you are in a negotiation, listen for the opportunities to change the nature of the discussion by changing a terminology. When you see somebody getting fixated and starting to get agitated about a percentage, I'm stuck on the percentage. Your counterpart was stuck on a percentage. My counterpart was stuck on a dollar number. Figure out how to change that and use a different language, because it interrupts the pattern of thinking and it moves the discussion forward versus being stuck on that. And you'd end up sticking and staying in corners and not progressing in the conversation.
I 100% agree. And for me, I was also future thinking of like, well, if they're stuck at 17 and then on the next hire down the road, we got to go back up to 20, that just feels tough. Mm-hmm. But a dollar going back to a percentage in the future, the truth of the matter is that third hire at the full 20% will only be like, I don't know, maybe 23 or 24,000, right, like that. So now 21 and 22, 23, it's all in the same ballpark. And so I think we'll get back to what we're used to, and both parties will be happy as their budgets reset next year and they're able to do that. Well, flipping the paradigm.
I think the other thing, though, that kind of this example highlights that is really important too for our audience to understand is it is very clear that you know your numbers. So a lot of small businesses go in and they negotiate based on a feeling. This feels like it's the right thing, that, but they don't have they don't have clarity on exactly what they should be negotiating. And as a result of not having clarity, once the negotiation hits kind of a sticking point, then they start losing their ability to articulate very clearly what it is that they want, because they don't know, because they're not researched enough on what they want and need and how their numbers work. And they haven't really analyzed that in a way that allows them to get creative, because you did a lot of things in that discussion that were very effective things to do. You changed the terminology so that you could move them off this percentage to something that was going to work for you over the long run. You looked for creative ways of solving a problem. You looked at what the longer term objectives were, right? So a lot of times people get focused on, what can I do today, without thinking about what the implication is of that in the long term. And I love that this is a renegotiation, which I definitely want to talk about renegotiation, because I imagine you do a lot of renegotiation stuff. But yeah, that was a great example. Thank you for sharing that. There's just a lot of stuff that just based on the description, that you were very effective in that communication.
You said some things too that I want to talk about, or is also feelings and emotions. Oh my gosh, feelings and emotions are the enemy of a good negotiation. You know this, like, man. And the problem is, most of the time when you get to the negotiating table, there was hours, if not days, if not years of work that went into, especially in our business, into getting to that conversation. When we're targeting an enterprise level company, Coca-Cola is not one of my customers right now. If we wanted to get as a primary IT staffing partner with Coca-Cola, it could take us anywhere between 6 months and a year to make that happen. And so when we finally get to the table to discuss their terms, and they're telling us we're not making any changes, usually my account executives are they're bought in with time, right? Because they've been pursuing this customer, right, and they've had to set dozens of meetings. This has been their baby of passion, right, for a year.
Right.
And so they get very wrapped up in, like, well, let's just take what they're offering, because, I worked so hard to even get here. I don't want to lose it. And that's where we are able to partner, where, we can work together, and I can take the emotion out of it for them a little bit, because, they don't want to lose all the work that they put into to get a deal done, right?
Absolutely.
And it's hard to step back from the emotion of it. And this is where, using partners, or having a negotiating team, or having someone like yourself that's if you were working with us and you were supporting us as our advocate on negotiating half, obviously you want us to win, but you don't have all that emotion. You're just looking at things from a very, high level, factoring in all the different things from both sides want, and you can make a good, decision on what should be done, taking the emotions out of it. And that's why I think using a coach, or using someone like yourself, who is an expert in the practice, but then also doesn't have all the emotions tied up into it, you're going to be able to negotiate better on our behalf than us, who is just an emotional wreck over it, right?
Yeah, I mean, are you familiar with Jed Blount?
I'm not.
So he's a sales guy. So and listeners know that sales is a part of negotiation, but it's not all of the negotiation, right? So, and I agree 100% with what you're saying. And I mean, one of the things, like, I'm constantly reading negotiation books, and I'm constantly taking classes myself. I'm taking 3 different classes right now, negotiation courses right now, because I'm constantly wanting to learn more to see how I can always keep improving in my negotiation as well. But Jed talks about, whoever shows their emotion at the proverbial negotiation table loses. Chris Voss, who's the author of Never Split the Difference, talks about how emotion is a given at the negotiation table. So you have these 2 views that are not diametrically opposed, because we are emotional creatures. We cannot, as soon as we want something from somebody else, emotion is immediately involved. Right. Immediately. We can do nothing about that. But what we can do is control how we express our emotion at the negotiation table. And when you have somebody who hits a point, and I see this all the time, I have to do this deal, then that deal is not going to be a successful deal for you.
Right.
Because once you have that mentality, you start to make concessions where you shouldn't be making concessions. And one of the advantages of having somebody like me or a third party is that I'm not the ultimate decision maker. So I have the ability to test things. I can say stupid things. I can try different things. I can play a different strategy. I just have because I don't have that ultimate decision-making authority, I have a lot more latitude to do things. And because I'm not in the organization and I'm not there for the long-term relationship, I can push harder in certain areas that my clients are not comfortable pushing, because they're really they're worried about, okay, if I say no to this, I might lose this deal, and therefore I can't say no to it. Right. And I don't have that fear. So then I can be a fall guy. Right. So there is definitely, so for your team, having you to go to is important for them to have leverage. Right. And for you in a high stakes negotiation, having somebody else that you can go to, and you have a parent company, so you do have having that approval authority is a thing. And so for small business owners who may be listening, this concept of approval authority is really important. And if you are the business owner and you are at the negotiation table and you're negotiating with one of these big companies, I strongly recommend that you, at minimum, have an advisory board who you have committed to, that for any major deals that you will consult them to get their advice on what to do, so that when you are in the negotiation, at minimum, you can say, it's my policy, it's my company policy that I discuss major decisions with my advisory board. And so, that way, then you give yourself the opportunity to step away from the table, to have secondary discussions with your team, so that you're making a rational, less emotional decision at the negotiation table.
That's amazing advice. I hope everyone listens and takes that to heart, because small business owner, a position like me where I run with, I'm running my own company, but at least I do have that level that I can reach out to somebody. I have a question for you then. Maybe you can help us. Okay, flip that around. When I am negotiating with a potential customer of mine, somebody that I want to become a customer, and they're pushing off things we're asking for, and they're saying, oh, we don't know, we'll have to check with legal, we'll have to check with our executives, we'll have to, they're playing we need to go check with someone else game. How do we get past that? Like, tell me how to get past that, because when we ask for something they don't want to do, I know that they use, I'm going to call it an excuse. They're using the excuse of like, oh, I need to check with someone else. That's why it's great advice that you're saying, hey, if you're the small business owner and your counterpart knows you are the ultimate decision maker, they're going to be like, well, just decide. You have the power.
Yeah, exactly.
They play the game of, well, I can't make that decision. I need to go check with legal. I need to check with procurement. I need to check with an executive. How do you beat that? Tell me, please.
So actually, I was just talking to somebody I'm putting some stuff together to do some training in their company. And so it was our first call, right? So we're not at the point yet of doing proposals or anything. And I spent 15, 20 minutes asking her about her process. Who's involved in the decision making? Do you have a budget? No. Then what's the process for getting a budget? Who are the decision makers who decide if you're going to move forward or not? At what point do your attorneys get involved? At what point does procurement get involved? What kind of timeline does that take from beginning to end? And then, so I often talk about how important it is, because negotiation, right? You know this, negotiation is not, it's a series of yeses. It's literally yes, built upon yes, built upon yes, right? The easiest things that you can get yeses on at the beginning of a negotiation when you are engaging in that relationship is around process. having clarity around the process. And this is something that we're even working in sales. I was stunned because I spent a lot of time working with procurement organizations, right? This is something I know, right? If you're working with a Goliath organization, they have a very specific process to go through the entire thing, right? From the moment that the business owner engages with a supplier, potential supplier, to the point where the business owner says, I like you, I want to hire you, right?
Mhm.
Well, guess what? They are not the decision maker. They have to take that if it's over a certain spending limit. What are the spending thresholds, right? In different companies, different levels within the organization are authorized to spend certain amounts of money without getting approvals. What's their spending authority? Does this have to have, what kind of a contract does this have to have? Is this a statement of work kind of situation, or do we need an MSA situation? What type of timing does that? If it's an MSA, who's involved in the MSA? How do we engage those people now, right? Instead of waiting, so that then you, especially as the small business owner, to my point earlier, that you know what are the other costs that are embedded in this MSA that I have to figure out operationally. Do I do them? Like background checks, and I always use background checks and drug testing as examples, right? We're headquartered in California. So, I remember I was in a negotiation with Verizon, and I was working with a hardware software company, and Verizon wanted this like 21 panel drug test. And I'm like, I live in California. You can go pound sand. It's like, that's not happening, right? It's like, what are you going to do with it? And they wanted all of my clients' suppliers and vendors to have the same level. They wanted us to rep and warrant that our suppliers and partners did the exact same level of drug testing, right? I'm like, we don't do that, right? We don't do that. And we don't have that in our contracts. So, but if I had, as a small business, a lot of companies would have just signed that, right? So it's like figuring that out and understanding what that process is first, early. Most salespeople that I've worked with do not ask enough questions early enough about process. And so then the process hangs them up. They're not able to plan effectively for it. When you're doing this, take notes. Like, this is the other thing that I see happen all the time. So you're talking about the process. Take notes on the process, compile them, and send them back to the counterpart and say, this is what you explained to me, and I just want to make sure that I've got this right, so that when they introduce something else, and because they might, right? But when they introduce something else later down the road, you can go, whoa, wait, time out, right? This is a new part of the process. What's the rationale for this piece being embedded in the process now, right? And now you have a different type of discussion. But people get so excited about talking about their product or their service and money that they don't deal with this process component up front. And every massive corporation has a very specific process. They have very specific thresholds. So if I'm spending this much money, I need all these people involved. But if it's this much money, I only need 3 people involved, right? So understand that is my number one piece of advice to overcome that, is to get that process nailed down.
Questions in general, I'm glad you said that. Oh my gosh, if you're not asking just 1,000 questions, you're not doing it right. I can't believe how many people I've seen enter into negotiations where they just want to say their piece and hope that the other side reciprocates. And it's like, you don't understand where they're coming from. If you don't start with understanding where they're coming from, negotiations are really tough. It's like being in a sword fight and you're blindfolded. Ask some questions. Figure out what they care about. So that one story I told you that went really well, we had asked a ton of questions and uncovered that, hey, budget is, we're at the end of the year. Budget is tight now. It will reset next year. That really helps us. Also, understanding that the manager who is in charge and making the decision, I know how managers think when you're looking at your budgets and your profitability and these things. And so I was able to share that with my account executive as she was asking questions and prodding. And I was like, listen, this is how this guy is thinking. I know I'm in the same boat. Like I understand where he's coming from. So I bet he'd really like to know the dollar figure versus the percentage. But she did a good job of uncovering a ton of information that allowed us to come back, game plan, talk through it, and then make a recommendation to them that both sides would agree upon. And then we got that little, that little cherry on top, which for us was the exclusive agreement, so that we don't have any competition on the roll, and it's guaranteed money for us. It just worked out really well. On the flip side, I was involved in one maybe a couple months back where we did not do a good job of asking questions. In fact, we had been given a contract, the MSA, from a potential customer. The person in procurement had said, we don't change our terms. Sign it or we'll find a different vendor. I'm like, okay, just curious, in the last year, how many vendors have you worked with or had to look for because you're so firm on these terrible terms? But the point I'm trying to make is that the account executive in that scenario did not ask any questions. In fact, at the negotiation table, she was reading back to them the terms in their contract, just reading, feeling like, okay, so it's only 18% and this guarantee and that is that the case? I'm like, why are you repeating back what's in there? They know what's in their agreement. We don't need to read it to them. And so we had to stop, pause, and sometimes negotiation you need to do that.
Absolutely.
And say, hey, give us a minute, put the phone on mute. It's like, let's uncover what they really care about. And lo and behold, after asking probably just 3 or 4 good pointed questions, found out, oh, wait a minute, they do negotiate on terms. Now, there's a few that they care about. And so we were able to uncover they care about these 3, and they're not going to change on those 3. But everything else is up for negotiation. But they're going to start with, we don't change any terms. And then it's like, well, does your boss care about payment terms? Does your boss care about guarantee? Does your boss care about, all these factors? And we find out these 5 things they don't care about. These 3 things they do. Okay, well, we care about this and they don't care about that. And we found some middle ground, but it was a tougher negotiation because we did not do a good job of digging in, understanding where they're coming from, understanding what they care about. If you can do that effectively on the front end, as you were mentioning, everything from there becomes easier.
Absolutely.
Throughout the rest of the process.
And working with Goliath organizations, the question, and it's true. I mean, I've pretty much banned this question from my vernacular. Stop asking why questions.
Okay.
They're ineffective, right? So what happens, right? Big behemoth company sends you the contract and says, we don't negotiate terms. And so the natural thing that people then say is, well, why not?
Yeah.
And their response every time is because.
Right.
What the heck do you do with because? You can't do anything with because. You can't build anything. You can't discover. It's not a curious enough question. And so when you're negotiating, I talk a lot in the training programs that I do around asking curious. It's critical as a negotiator to be curious about your counterpart. And so asking what and how questions are far more effective in helping you gather information and show curiosity and to discover and uncover things that will help move your conversations forward and build a stronger relationship. So I always tell people, eliminate why and why also makes people immediately defensive.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. They feel like they're doing something wrong and they have to.
Right. Exactly. It's just as it creates this horrible. I have a mentor, Blair Dunkley, which the audience keeps hearing me talk about him. And I interviewed him earlier in the program. And he's just got some amazing stuff. And, but asking effective questions is absolutely critical. And if somebody is at the negotiation table and is not showing and demonstrating that they are curious about their counterpart, you're not going to get a good deal. You're not going to get a good deal.
I couldn't agree more about that.
Yeah, that's huge. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. So what are some of the things that, as in your situation doing, so many David and Goliath negotiations, what are some of so we've talked about, asking effective questions and being curious, and we talked about changing the nature of a negotiation. What are some of the other amazing things and one of the things I like about you, Matthew, is that you are you are a nurturing person, and so you kind of approach, I can tell the way that you approach a negotiation, and you actually talked about I talked about it in terms of why you went into sales. That relationship based component is really important for you, and building those relationships is important. What are some of like, if you had to pick three things that you thought were like super critical to your success as a negotiator, what would those be?
Empathy would probably be my first one. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier. It's like, if you're understanding what the other side really cares about, and you're put yourself in their shoes, if you have the empathy for what matters to them, it really gives you that high view of the whole situation where you can make rational decisions, or in our case, very good proposals, something that will resonate with them because you know what they care about.
Right.
I don't even know if I can come up with three, because empathy, I would say, is number one when you're going into a negotiation. And people always think of negotiation as war, right? It's somebody, there's got to be a winner and a loser, right? We're all kind of born that way from being competitive, playing sports or music, whatever you're competitive in. You want to be the best, and it's like, I need to win and they need to lose, right? And sometimes people care more about them losing than you actually winning, which is
yep, I have a name for those people.
Yeah, they just care about winning. And I like to win.
There's not a lot of them. Fortunately, there's only about 10% of negotiators who negotiate that way as their default. And for the audience, if you text VENN, VENN to 26786, you can actually or go to our website at vennegotiation.com. You can take a quiz to learn what your default negotiation style is. But
awesome. I've done it. It was great. You got my style back.
Yeah, but I don't have it in front of me. What was it again?
I'm trying to remember.
Were you an ambassador?
I think so. Yeah.
I think you were an ambassador. But this style that you're talking about is a champion, and there are only about 10% of people, but they do represent, like, when people think about negotiation, they think that most people are this winner take all, I'm going to annihilate you, and negotiation is a battle, and it's war, it's the art of war. It's all Sun Tzu, rape and pillage, and, destroy and conquer. But that's really not. I actually have a saying that somebody on my team just helped me come up with that really embodies my philosophy on negotiation. And that is that negotiation is nothing more than a conversation about a relationship. And there is no win in relationship.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. I don't know. Are you familiar with Simon Sinek? He writes.
No.
He writes the book Why, or about your purpose, and then he has now one that's called The Infinite Game, and it's like, we're just living to perpetuate the game and keep it moving, right? Like business, you don't win business. You're constantly playing, and you're playing to do the best that you can, but you don't win business. And I think people who feel like negotiations have to be a winner and a loser, if like you said, you're going into it with a war mindset, I just don't think that you can actually get what you want, because your counterpart's not going to get what they want. And it's funny, you hear things like, well, both sides should feel good when you come out of a negotiation. I've heard people tell me the exact opposite. If you did well in the negotiation, both sides will feel like they lost. And it's like, how can it be both? You hear people say both sides feel like they win or both sides feel like they lost. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know which one's right. They both kind of make sense. But to your original question, empathy is first. Number two, very clear, trust. If you can build trust and rapport with the person, there's going to be a few things in every agreement, especially these contracts I look at usually are anywhere between 18 pages on the low end, 30 on the high end. I mean, they're huge. There's always going to be a few little things that are just kind of, you just don't love. But when you feel like, hey, we're going to do the right thing. Even the lawyer said this, but we're going to do right. That's just kind of how we operate. When you have that trust with the person, the little things that go by the wayside. You know, you say, hey, let's agree on the big things to make sure those are right.
Yep.
And little nitty gritty stuff that at the end of the day probably will never come up. It's like winning the business aspect of the negotiation versus the law aspect. Because I'm not a lawyer. I didn't learn to read contracts in college. I learned how to talk and find common ground, uncover needs, and then sell to those. Like, this is the stuff that I learned. And so I would say empathy, and then trust. And then the last part, if I have to come up with three, is like, just be someone they want to do business with, right? Be a good person. So you had a great saying. I loved your kind of definition on negotiation. My personal little saying is, everything is people. Not people are everything, but everything is people. And it's very important because you can boil anything down to the people behind it, whether it's a business, a process, a procedure, whatever it is in life, you can boil it down to everything is people. And so if you're empathetic to them and they trust you, business is easier, much easier. And so that's kind of the way we operate our business, and why I think we've been doing well and growing is because we really live by, like, we just want to be good people to do business with. And when your other side feels like they're missing out by not working with you, all of a sudden they're more agreeable to your terms.
Oh, I love that. That's so true, because, and the things that I hear when I hear you talk, the things that I love about, there's just a lot that you do that resonates with how I approach negotiation as well. And you're always thinking about, what's that long-term look like? What's the long term in terms of the fiduciary responsibility you have for the company, but also what's that long-term relationship piece look like? And how does that grow? How do we grow that, right? And that's something like what, through the stories and examples that you shared, that you're constantly looking for. And so it really embodies the notion of negotiation being a relationship. And I agree. I mean, empathy, I mean, when we go into negotiation, right, people tend to focus on what they want, and even then they don't actually often have clarity on actually what they really want. They have a high level view of what they want, but they really are not clear on all the things that they want, and they don't understand their trade-offs very well. And when they don't have, and because they fixate on that, they become kind of myopically focused on that, and they lose the opportunity to create more value for both parties, because they're only looking at their side of things and not paying attention to what their counterpart needs and what their counterpart wants to be successful. And that empathy is important to be able to uncover that, because it creates the trust. Having empathy creates the opportunity for trust. And with trust comes transparency. And when you have transparency in a negotiation, then you're able to collaboratively problem solve in a way that will blow your mind in terms of discovering what value actually exists. And I guarantee you, and there's research that shows it, that when we're negotiating for something that's like a total of 100, we think it's 100, it's actually 142, because most negotiations ignore 42% of the value that exists around it, because they're so myopically focused on that thing, whatever it is, that they don't see what that other 42% is. And when you take that and you have that trust and that transparency that comes from that trust to explore that, oh my God, now you're negotiating from a position of abundance instead of scarcity. And that completely changes, that opens up the entire world in terms of what you can accomplish in the negotiation.
Couldn't agree more. I have a question for you, if we can kind of take directions. So I hate when people put themselves in a box and they say things like, well, I'm just not a good negotiator, or I can't be good at negotiation, or I'm not a salesperson, or I'm not a this, or I'm not a that. And they just feel like, hey, I wasn't born to be great at this out of the box, and I'm not willing to learn, right? So what I love, what you just said, is you've been an expert negotiator, global scale, biggest companies on earth. And you just said that you're taking 3 classes right now on how to be even better. I love that. Like, anybody who doesn't have a learning mindset of I can always get better, you're either learning and going up, or you're losing and you're going down. There's no in the middle. And I love the fact that like you're learning. So I guess my question is like, I believe that some people can be born with certain given abilities that naturally make them good at certain activities, like negotiating.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that, I came from an Italian, mostly immigrant family, and we negotiated for everything. I have two brothers, very similar in age. We very competitive. I started out negotiating everything. So I feel like I had a good start, but you're not, no one's naturally good at it. You have to learn. You have to read books on it, learn from experts like you, listen to podcasts, listen to the people who have done the very best and read and study it to get better. And I just feel like most people, because negotiations generally feel, I don't know, maybe icky or scary or it makes people anxious. Probably anxiety is probably the number one reason why people hate it. They're just like, well, I don't like it, and so I can never be good at it. How much value do you put on like the natural abilities, even as far as like being attractive, having a pleasant voice? By the way, you have a very pleasant voice. I am sure that naturally helped you when you were negotiating for Verizon or one of these other companies. How much do you feel is like God-given ability, and how much do you feel is important on what you just learn and get better at? What's your opinion on that?
So I know you love working with kids. So I always bring this back to children. So, I have three kids. My kids are all in their mid 30s. And but I remember when they were little, and, what the way that I kind of describe it is, actually, I think that our ability to negotiate is something that is innate to every human being. And you see it in children. You see it in, how a child asks a mom for something versus their father versus a grandparent versus a teacher or a family friend. And as a child, they adjust how they ask for something, and they are persistent in how they ask for something. Now, what happens is that we develop a style. We figure out a way of behaving that works for us as children. So if you were a child who threw temper tantrums and jumped up and down and screamed and yelled and called people names, I am pretty sure you're still doing that. You might not be doing it in exactly the same way, but you are probably still doing that. And I don't know about you, but I have been in many negotiations where I have had my counterpart calling me names, throwing things, being demeaning, right? Screaming and yelling, right? That person did not mature beyond that did not mature their negotiation skills beyond that 7-year-old child. Also, you've got the children who ran away to their room and stuck their head under the pillow, shut the door and stuck their head under their pillow and stayed until everything blew over and appeared to go away, right? Mm-hmm. If you were one of those children and that was how you dealt with conflict, and and you didn't ask for what you want because you were afraid of no, you are still doing that. You are still doing that. Maybe again, you're not running to your bedroom, shoving your head under your pillow or hiding behind a door or something, but you're still doing that. So what I believe is that over time, from the time we're small children to the time we're teenagers, we start hearing no more. Mm-hmm. And when we start hearing no, we start to become afraid of that no. And that fear of no, because no implies a judgment on us, right? I asked for something and I didn't get it. Therefore, I was being judged in some way, and I failed in some way. So my thing is that, and because I am a constant student of negotiation, and I've taken so many courses, it's crazy. And I went to Harvard Business School, where they essentially, Harvard was where the what's the word that I'm looking for, where the discipline of negotiation became a discipline, right? Yeah. And I was taught by the professors who wrote Getting to Yes and Getting Past No, and they are amazing. But negotiation is taught the same way everywhere, in pretty much every class I've ever taken. And we do not teach people how to stop being their 7-year-old self as an adult in a negotiation. We don't create opportunities to say, okay, well, when you were 7, you knew how to negotiate with your mom in this way because she behaved this way, and your dad this way because he was this way, and your teacher. And we don't bring that capability back. So like in the negotiation styles quiz, you have a default, and what happens is everyone goes to that default style without practicing any of the other styles, which they do use, they just don't use them with intent. And so I also get a lot of people who say, especially small businesses, are like, I don't negotiate.
Yeah.
And they think that negotiation is this point in time activity that is a meeting or is a something, and it's not. You're constantly negotiating. So I believe that negotiation is something that we are all innately gifted at doing. I think it's something that separates us from the rest of, God's creatures. And, but it's something that we're not taught to do, and we're not taught to be intentional about it. And that's
That's
part of
great
what I'm hoping to change, is that negotiation, because I believe it is a conversation about a relationship. And I believe that all relationships require us to be intentional, that your conversation and your negotiation should be intentional. And that's really, I'm trying to elevate that in the conversation.
I love what you said about kids. I have a 7-year-old boy. We call him a master manipulator. He is amazing at negotiating. He can tell you all the reasons why he should be able to do something. And have you thought of this, Dad? But what about that? And you said this last time. I mean, he's amazing. And I was like, how do you go from that as a kid who's just naturally good at it to then, like, I have some people on my team. Somebody said the other day, I heard him say, oh my gosh, I got to go and buy a new car. And I would rather blow my brains out than have to go deal with the negotiations with the sales guy in the car lot. And me personally, I'm thinking like, oh my God, I love car buying day. I love going to the lot. I love the game. I can't wait. It's usually me versus some 23-year-old kid who's been working at the car dealership for 6 months, and I'm like ready to roll. But they've gone from being good at it as a kid to now as an adult, they're like, I would rather, I'd rather have my going to buy a car, right? Because of the whole negotiation process and the sales guy saying, okay, let me go check with my boss on that price and that whole game. Like, I love it, but most people hate it. It's just funny that you mentioned that kids are naturally pretty good at it, but somewhere in our growth of becoming an adult, it becomes like icky. And it also made me think when you were talking, it was like, we don't teach this stuff. You have decided, okay, this was my career path. You got to love it when you got into Verizon, and they put you on on international negotiation, which to me is crazy that you came out of school and they're like, hey, join the international negotiation team. And that's just an awesome story as someone coming out of school. But what I was getting at was we don't teach it. So me as a business leader, I have all these, most of the people that are on my team are mid-20s, early 30s. And I'm expecting them to negotiate with people like you who work at huge corporations and are pros. I'm expecting them to negotiate, and I have not equipped them with anything, really. You don't learn this in college. Now, you went to a specific course for a specific reason at Harvard to learn negotiation. But if you just go get a business degree or a psychology degree or even a communications degree, there's no negotiation course. And then when you get into your work world and you have to negotiate for things, in our case, almost every day, nobody teaches you how to be good. And this is a misstep that we as business leaders and universities are missing. Like, why are we not teaching a skill? I've heard it said that on an average day, I think Chris Voss says this, on an average day, you negotiate between 6 and 7 times, just on an average day, just for your everyday course of what you're doing, 6 to 7 times a day. And none of us have ever taken like a real class or any instruction on how to be good at this. It's crazy. We need more people like you who are educating the masses on why this is important and how to be good at it. Because most of us, we don't like it. It doesn't feel comfortable.
Right. And I mean, it's considered part of the same category that public speaking is. So it's considered a social phobia, which really, when you peel it back, it's this fear of judgment, of being judged by somebody. And when you're engaging in a negotiation, you're actually inviting that judgment. And that is the part that feels icky for a lot of people, because they're like, knowingly, just like with public speaking, they're putting themselves in front of somebody, giving them an opportunity to judge them. And so our brain is like, don't do that, don't do that. And because it's trying to protect us. And so we get, because we're afraid of that. And I think that, one of the things that, negotiation training has largely been reserved for attorneys. So I get all the time, well, aren't you an attorney? And I'm like, no.
Yeah,
No.
right.
And they're like, well, I thought only lawyers negotiated. And I'm like, no, that's, and in fact, a recent study came out, I think by the Institute for Supply Management. It was either Institute for Supply Management or the International Association of Contract and Commercial Management. And it showed that I think it was something like 70% of major corporations no longer use attorneys for most of their contracting work. Most of their contracting work is done like people like me who are in contract management and procurement, and they do most of that work now. Mm-hmm. And so it's a huge switch. But one of the things that's very interesting about negotiation training programs, for the most part, and part of what I'm like super excited about Venn Masters, because it's so different in terms of the things I'm using to teach people, is that in most programs you get a case. It's like, here's your role, you go read your roles, you study your roles, you figure out what you're going to do, you come together, you negotiate, and then you go back and you report out what you did, and then they score you, and it's like, okay, yeah. And I'm like, that is the most ineffective way of teaching. You've lost nothing. Yeah. So like in my programs, I actually, like, people get broken out, and we do cases, but they're different. They're unusual, and they get your brain to think in a different way. And I come in and I observe, and it's like, and it's like, what if you heard the question in this way? Do you think you might have responded differently? What if you used this piece of information, right? So really trying to help people see that there's a different way of negotiating and being, and helping people see that their style of negotiation is potentially negatively impacting the outcome. Yeah. Right. And they don't even realize it. Right. And so to me, that it's a much more hands-on, more personalized approach to teaching negotiation, which also helps, and using examples that are like Sesame Street, right? People can relate to Sesame Street. They can't relate to, how peace is being negotiated or not, failed peace negotiations in the Middle East. They can't relate to that, right? They can't, it's like, how do you take that learning and break it down and bring it down to where the person who you're teaching is at? And that's really important to me, and something that I'm passionate about bringing into Venn Masters. So
that's great. Love it.
So did you have any more questions?
So just to go back, I was asking, like, do you feel like the given abilities is more important, or the learn? And I think, very clearly heard your answer, that there's a lot to learn. And if you want to be good at this, you need to care about it, seek it out, and then learn. I do think it's nice to have, like I said, a pleasant voice. Being mildly attractive does help in the negotiation room. Some of these things that we don't have any control over, but you can compensate for what you're not given, by learning and by picking up some good tactics. And there's lots of tactics out there. I'm sure you've heard, mirroring and different things like that.
Oh yeah.
That help you get to where you want to be.
I do want to say something about the attractiveness, right? I think that empathy trumps that.
I would agree.
I think one's, and some people are more empathetic than others, right? And I think one's ability to meet their counterpart where they're at, and to see their counterpart, and to listen intently, like to listen with their whole body, right? Listening, I say, is a full contact activity, right? only seven, according to UCLA study, only 7% of communication is about the words that we speak.
Right.
38% is about the tone and pace of speech, and 55% of it is nonverbal. So, we have to, when we're listening, we have to listen with our eyes as much as we're listening with our ears. And, just something gets communicated. If somebody's wearing a certain type of perfume, there's a communication in that, right? Communication is a lot more all encompassing. But yeah, I think that empathy trumps physical attractiveness. And I would actually, and this, we might get some comments in the show notes when I say this, but attractiveness can actually hurt you sometimes in a negotiation.
Wow.
Because, and as a woman in particular, if an attractive woman is often discounted, and I actually am, I'm wanting to create a program and work with somebody who specializes in this to help create it. So if anybody is listening and this is your expertise, please reach out to my team. But for attractive women in negotiation becomes sexualized, and it can be very demeaning and controlling, and it can be very, very challenging. And so, and it's something, and it can be subtle sometimes, but sometimes it can be actually quite overt. And so sometimes being attractive, especially as a woman, can be a detriment in the negotiation. And
Wow.
so it's something to overcome. For men, I think that it's different. A man who knows he's attractive, walks in and he has a level of bravado, and potentially in his in how he presents himself, that makes him feel more confident. And so he may appear to be a better negotiator. He's not necessarily. It's just that the people in the room may be giving him a benefit of the doubt that he might not necessarily be given otherwise. But regardless, I still think empathy trumps all of that.
I was just about to say, I like that you said if you're empathetic and then the people trust you, like the other factors, what you look like, what you sound like,
don't matter at all
if you've built that trust and stuff. But okay, so as a word of advice to me and other small businesses, people who are negotiating with these giants, can you tell us your thoughts on like phone versus video conference versus in person? Because like I always tell my executives, I'm like, get in front of these people. You can be a real jerk on email. Like if you're negotiating terms back and forth on email, you can be a real jerk on email, and people will hide behind email or text messages or whatever. As soon as you get them on the phone, they're a little bit nicer. As soon as you see them in person, they're a whole heck of a lot nicer. And magically you're building that trust rapport. You can read the room. You can see the visual cues. And so I'm always pushing towards face-to-face, which right now with COVID, okay, whatever. We can only do so much. Video is the next best. That's my view, but I'd love to hear your expertise.
Yeah, so you and I are aligned on that. So, one, when I'm negotiating, because most of my negotiation for the past 20 years has been kind of on this David and Goliath stuff, many big companies have distributed negotiation teams.
Yes.
So, right, they have a team. They have somebody in Ireland, somebody in France, somebody in India, and somebody in Texas, right? And sometimes those people have never even met physically, like so they have this distributed negotiation team. So I've been doing all my negotiation. I think in the last 20 years, maybe I've traveled, I don't know, a handful of times for a negotiation. I am a huge fan of video. And I will go on video even if my counterpart chooses not to, because for me, it's a way of demonstrating transparency.
Huh, that's interesting.
And so it's like, and it makes them a little uncomfortable because they're not being transparent. And so for me, if matter of fact, just last night, I had an issue within my own business, and somebody started texting me, and I was like, okay, this is too much to be talking about over text. Just pick up the damn phone. Right? It's like, pick up the freaking phone. Let's jump on. I was like, can we jump on Zoom?
Yeah.
Because we were having a tense discussion. I was like, can we just jump on Zoom? So we jumped on, they use Google Meets. I was like, whatever, I'll jump on that. So that's fine. But so for me, email is absolutely horrific. I
Agreed.
hate email.
Amen.
Do not negotiate terms. Email I use for clarification and confirmation.
Confirmation. Love it for confirmation.
But I do not.
Let's agree it's in writing. I love it.
Exactly. But I do not like it for introducing a new issue or a new topic, or what are your thoughts on this? Like, if you want my thoughts on something, call me, right? Reach out to me. I'll use text for certain things. Some people prefer text. So in the negotiation quiz, we wanted to figure out a very simplistic, down and dirty way of saying, how does this person communicate? So we just broke people down into either traditional communicators or modern communicators. And traditional communicators like emails and long meetings, and modern communicators want bullet points and texts. And so kind of know which one you are and know which one your counterpart is, and adapt kind of accordingly. But if I'm negotiating, I never answer the phone. I always call. So if a counterpart is calling me, I will let that roll to voicemail, and then I will call back.
I like that.
I don't want to get caught off guard with something.
Yeah.
I want to understand what my agenda is on the call and be very intentional about that. And I definitely prefer video and in person, hands down. And the hard part, and there's a lot of, I've had a lot of conversations with people on the video, because a lot of people, especially in sales, are accustomed to in-person meetings, right? That's how the sales universe works, or has worked up until 2020. And so the thing that we lose in Zoom or a video versus an in-person meeting is the ability to stand up and walk to a whiteboard and problem solve together.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to, use a prop, grab notebooks, draw circles, create a prop, figure out how to use a whiteboard situation on Zoom and create more of a workspace. I also tell people to spend more time away from the camera, move away, get a very good mic so that you can move away more from the camera, because you lose. I was on the phone with somebody, and he was sat far enough back, but he was like this the whole time. I mean, and he didn't unfold his arms. And he's like, and he asked me, he's like, well, we're trying to figure out how to teach our more junior people how to, negotiate more effectively, with Zoom. And I said, try moving your body, lean in, lean out, act like you're in person, use your hands, but to do that, you need to have a good green screen and a good mic, because if you try to do that, not have a good green screen or a background, or no green screen at all, then it gets distracting. But yeah, I do think that, I think video, and I actually have now started finding, I said this to my husband last night. I said, I find I'm starting to get frustrated when people make a phone call and are not on video. And it's interesting, because I had a call the other day, and it was somebody who was prospecting me, and they were not on video and I was. And the comment was, well, I'm not video ready. And my interpretation of that was, so then this call is not important enough for you to actually get video ready. Yeah, you could not spend 5-10 minutes putting a brush through your hair or whatever. And so I won't do business with that person because of that. It's like that. This is going to be the standard. Video calling is the standard. The Jetsons, right? For those of you on who are listening, the Jetsons, this video call part, this is real, and it's here to stay. So get used to it and figure out how you can do shortcuts to be video ready, because it is going to, not being on camera when somebody else is going to start impacting your business negatively.
That's a great point. I hope people hear that, because I've been telling my sales team this year, I'm like, if you had just video called one of your customers out of the blue last year, it'd have been weird, right? Like it would feel weird that they would be like, why are you video chatting me? This is weird. Now it's totally normal, business as usual, and it will continue that way. And
Absolutely.
so there's a lot of great tools coming out. We just found this one that you record like a 1-minute video where you say like, hey, my name's Matthew, I'm with Agile, want to help you with whatever you know about their business. And it just shows up as a video in their email. They don't have to click anything, they don't have to do anything. You're just in their email as a video. And I'm like, a year ago, that product would have been like weird and people would have thought it was terrible.
Yeah,
I'm killing it this year because with the advent of video for everything, those types of communication things are, this is more sales tangent, but they're now commonplace and very useful and
absolutely
unique.
And they're going to keep coming. So, Hey, so Matthew, how can people find you? Because I just am, you work in Atlanta and you have offices in Miami. How can people find you? How can they find more about Agile?
Thank you. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Matthew Marini. My name is pretty unique. Marini is my last name. So you'll find me on LinkedIn, connect with me. For Agile, our website is gotoagile.com, GOTOAGILE.com. And so if you need help finding, mostly what we focus on are developers, guys that are in like DevOps, cloud, and then we're really good in the project management space, being our name is Agile. People in the Agile practice is what we're really good at. So go to our website. I'm on there too. You can find me there, and then connect with me on LinkedIn. And this has been great. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been really fun to chat about negotiation.
Thank you, Matthew. You've been an awesome guest. I really appreciate it. And please reach out, audience. Please reach out to Matthew for IT staffing needs. He's got an amazing group of people, amazing team, and he is just a very heart-centered guy. So I'm really excited to help support you in growing your business. So thank you to everyone for staying tuned in today. It's so great to have you here. I look forward to seeing you on our next episode of In the Venn Zone. Have a great day, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Venn Zone with Christine McKay. We invite you to visit our website at www.venn.zone to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Empower the negotiator in you and successfully level the playing field. Join us again next time here on In the Venn Zone.